Hi everyone, it's Blake again with ChessPathways.com, back with another game analysis video for you from one of our members. Again, if you're not a member yet, please go to ChessPathways.com, sign up today, it's free, and you'll get access to exclusive content. So let's get started here. This game was sent to me by Orion, who had the white pieces here, and this was played on Lee Chess. So we start out with a Sicilian, and we have the Najdorf variation. And he said that he'd seen this in the past, that he knew bishop g5 was a move here, e6, and you get this very aggressive position. He plays f4, which is a book move, h6, bishop h4, and now queen b6. And he makes an interesting comment here. He says he's never seen the move queen b6 before, and he wasn't too sure what to do here. He thought of a lot of candidate moves here, which is great. Whenever you're not sure what to do, especially that first move where you're not sure what to do out of the opening, when you've reached the end of your preparation and you're thinking on your own, it's very important to treat that position like a critical position and to do some deep thinking about how you want to proceed now that you're kind of on your own. So this is obviously a very sharp line, this whole Najdorf Sicilian with bishop g5. And it turns out queen b6 is actually black's most popular move in this position. Now, I can understand why a Najdorf player might not know about that, because this h6 move itself isn't too popular. You get kind of a little sideline here. Although it is a theory move. It has been played many times before. So queen b6. And here, White was considering several moves. He was considering taking on f6, he was considering playing e5, queen d2, and eventually he settled on knight b3 just to make sure that b2 pawn is defended and get that knight out of harm's way in case the queen moves later, I guess is the plan. So, Orion, I'm not sure if you're aware of the poison pawn variation, but in this line with bishop g5, it's actually very common for the queen to come here, oops, not there, to come to b6 and scoop up this b2 pawn. But White gets compensation for it. For example, you said queen d2 and you gave this 2 question marks. You said this would have been a blunder. It's not really the end of the world to give up this pawn. This is actually very common in this line. Rook b1, queen a3, and you're down a pawn, but you have this active rook, and you can quickly play e5, and it's interesting. It's definitely worth considering. Another move that people play in this position you didn't consider after queen b6, and I agree that moves like b3 and rook b1 aren't very good. B3 weakens the dark square so much. But one move here is a3, which is interesting. It indirectly defends this pawn because now knight a4 would trap the queen because this a3 square is no longer available. And people play a3 and then bishop f2 very soon, and this queen has to move away because there's discoveries threatened and you can't really take the b2 pawn. So that's another interesting way to play. Of course, there is some concern after you play a3, can you really castle long as easily because now b5 and this whole pawn storm or bishop sacrifices. It is more dangerous to castle queenside if you've played a3, but it's an interesting way to indirectly defend b2 and force this queen back. And I just want to say, I'm by no means an expert in this bishop g5 line. I don't play bishop g5 against the Najdorf myself. But if you do want to continue to play this line, I would recommend investing some time to study the theory a little more, even in some of these sidelines with h6 and just all of black's possibilities. If this was a lower rated game, I wouldn't recommend that. I would say just, follow the opening principles and you're good. But this is between, looks like a 1700, 1800. In this range, these things do start to become more important. So if you do want to play really sharp opening lines, I would recommend studying the theory a little more. So if we go back after queen b6, you decided to play knight b3. I'm wondering if you played this almost out of desperation, just because you didn't know what to do, you didn't know how to defend this b2 pawn. But I think if you would have asked what's my opponent going to do after I play this move, like I always recommend asking, you would have found queen e3, which is really annoying, actually. And it sounds like you saw queen e3. Right after you moved, you saw queen e3. You say here in your comment you were really surprised he missed queen e3. Queen e3 would have just taken the game away from you. So you saw queen e3. It wasn't a hard move to find. You just couldn't find it before you played your move. And this happens all the time. This is a very important thing to learn from. It's just such an important habit to get into. Before you make any move, just ask, if I make this move, what if I were my opponent? What would I do? And if you just ask that question, what's my opponent going to do if I make this move? I think you could have found queen e3 before you made the move instead of after you made the move. Anyway, black missed queen e3. Black played knight b to d7. Queen to d3. Yeah, for me, I feel like the queen's a little more natural on d2, but that might be a preference thing. I think it's fine. You're developing your pieces. You're about to get castled. I think you actually have a nice position now after black missed queen e3. You're probably going to castle queenside. You have good control of the center. And I kind of like White's position. Bishop e7, you castle, and black plays their queen back to c7. So here you said this was another critical moment for you. You were kind of weighing your options, deciding what plan to follow. And that's good. This is definitely a situation where I would stop and think too. You said you were thinking of the pawn storm right away with like h3 and g4 and g5, but you were concerned that he would play b5, so you thought you wanted to develop everything first and bring your bishop to e2. Actually, I think bishop e2 is a nice move because it supports g4 anyway. You don't need this move h3 to support g4. You can just do it with the bishop here, and you develop a piece in the process. The only thing there that I thought was a little interesting is you said you were concerned that he's going to go b5. Well, he's definitely going to go b5. That's going to happen no matter what you do. Are you saying you're concerned that he's going to kick your knight away or something, and then the bishop's going to come... Oops, not there. The bishop's going to come there, and there's going to be pressure down the diagonal if your g4 pawn's not there, and this pawn's attacked, the knight's being kicked away, there's the pin. Yeah, there is some concern like that, but again, this is very common in these Sicilian lines. This is how black gets their counterplay. They expand on the queen's side and try to put pressure on your center. But with all that said, I do like the move bishop e2. I think it's a good way to not only develop a piece, but it supports your g4, g5 idea if you ever want to come back to that. So black does play b5. Bishop f3. Yeah, I like that move. It's common in a lot of these lines as well. Bishop e7 and g4. So g4 is a move that makes sense, at face value at least, kind of expanding on the king side. But this is definitely a very critical position here before g4, so I don't think we can automatically march ahead with this plan. I did some checking with a computer here because a lot of these lines are very, very sharp, and it found some amazing ideas for both players that I probably wouldn't have found over the board, especially because I'm not familiar with these sort of positions playing them myself, because I don't play this bishop g5 line. But this is really interesting. So it turns out after g4, the position is actually quite bad for white, because black has this idea to play g5 here, which I've seen this idea before in the Peert's defense line when the bishop comes to g5 and h4. This is my first time seeing it in the Sicilian because I don't play this line as white, but this is really interesting. So white's in a lot of trouble here. If white takes, the knight gets this outpost, and black's able to eliminate all the defenders of the e4 pawn in time, or at least enough of the defenders. Let's say the queen moves, black will take back here, white can take back, black will kick the knight away. It doesn't really matter where the knight goes. Black will capture on f3, white will take back, and now bishop takes e4, and white is lost. Obviously, not all of those moves are forced. White does have some chances to try to improve on that, but none of them are quite sufficient. For example, let's go back a bit here, and after g5, let's try not taking here and giving up the e5 square for the knight. Let's play bishop g3. This line is still very nice for black. Black can take, play knight to e5, take, and it's actually surprisingly hard to play this position as white. Now, you're not down any material yet, but black controls so many key central squares. Your g4 pawn doesn't seem to be really accomplishing anything now, and it kind of sticks out. And black just has the simple plan of playing b4, kicking your knight away, and winning the e4 pawn. Or playing a5, a4 later as well, playing b4 and then a5 and a4. For example, if you just defend the e4 pawn, then I think this plan works pretty well. b4, and what do? If you move your knight to a4, it looks like it's possibly in danger of getting trapped there fairly soon. If you play your knight back, trying to reroute it somewhere, now a5 looks very annoying, a4 is coming, and your king's positioning is going to get ruined. So it turns out this move g5 is just extremely strong, and that wouldn't have been immediately clear to me either, but the more I look at it, it makes a ton of sense. This is a common theme in this kind of particular situation, like a temporary pawn sacrifice to really free up some squares for the black pieces. And it's very thematic how everything works together here. The bishop putting pressure on the center, the b5 pawn kicking the knight away, all these Sicilian ideas. Everything just works for black here. So that's really unfortunate. And, as it turns out, in this position, before you play g4, white actually has a way to grab the advantage here, which is also very sharp and requires a lot of calculation. You can actually take on f6 here, and black cannot take back with the bishop because of the d6 pawn. If they take back with the knight, now check this out. We have this move e5. This is kind of a common theme when the bishop is lined up like this, and it just works out here because black's not castled. After takes, we can play knight takes b5. And if they recapture our knight, of course if they don't recapture our knight, they're kind of in trouble. They have to move the queen. If they recapture the knight, we take back, and we're picking up the bishop because of the fork. And this position is good for white. That means that after bishop takes f6, if black sees this, which I don't know how likely that is, but if they see what's coming, they probably should take back with the g-pawn instead. And now the tactics don't really work, but you're just left with this really unbalanced position. Black has this large mass of central pawns, but where does black put their king in the long term? And it's just really a game from here, but white should have some advantage here, according to computers at least. So this is really interesting, just how sharp a lot of these lines are and how much is lurking behind the scenes. You really have to be on your toes playing these sharp Sicilians. So bishop b5, you played g4, black played b4, and you retreated your knight to e2. Yeah, g5 would have been good for black on the last move, and I think here it's still not too late for black to find this g5 idea. Instead, they played d5, which is nowhere near as strong as g5, and it allows you to play e5 here and gain some space, kick that knight away. You also considered this other line with bishop takes f6. Yeah, I don't think this is good, because you're really just improving this knight on d7, which doesn't really have a good square right now, and you're giving black the bishop pair. Let's just go ahead and keep looking at the game line. So after e5, knight to e4, you exchange on e7. And here you played rook d to f1, which you say you don't like because it's tying down your rook. The knight's a monster on e4. And yeah, you mentioned this line. I think this is the best line too. Just exchanging off that knight, playing queen d6, and you'll get to go to this kind of endgame position, which is unclear, but I kind of like white here. You get this strong passed pawn on d6. This e4 pawn is a passed pawn, but it could also be a target. Black has these double pawns. And black's attacking ideas here don't do as much damage with the queens off the board. So I think going to that endgame was a good option here. Instead, you played rook d to f1, trying to maintain the tension. Rook a to c8. Yeah, black's attacking ideas just look a lot better than yours, actually. And black actually still has ideas to try to undermine your center with g5, trying to grab this e5 pawn and just blowing everything open. Knight e to d4. My first instinct is that your other knight's going to want that square, because a5, a4 is possibly coming, and it looks like that other knight would really like to be able to come to the d4 square. So let's see how this goes. Black played queen to c4. And you just took on e4 here, bishop takes e4. I think now it's actually worth considering just playing queen e3 and keeping queens on the board, because this queen's not well placed on c4 actually, because knight a5 is an idea here, and black already has to probably retreat the queen to avoid knight a5. And now you have ideas to start your attack on the centralized black king as well. So I think queen e3 was actually the best move here. But after queen to c4, queen c4, you took on e4, they took back, and we get this endgame. And here you played knight a5, and I like what you said here. This is very interesting, and something that happens all the time, again, in chess. You said this was all part of your calculation from 20 bishop takes e4. So what you're saying is back when you played bishop takes e4 here, on move 20, you saw this line. You saw he had to take back your bishop, you were going to exchange queens, and play knight a5. And even if you think you've calculated 3 moves ahead, when you actually get to the position here, you shouldn't just blindly play knight a5, even if it was your calculation a couple moves ago. I've seen errors happen like this all the time, including for me. Because remember, 3 moves ago, when you were calculating, you were just trying to get a rough draft kind of idea of, is this bishop takes e4 move viable? What does the future look like? And you looked ahead a little bit, and you came to the conclusion, okay, this is a move that I like. I like the resulting idea here. But in this position, your goals are a little different here. You're not trying to justify bishop takes e4. You have to find the best move in this position. You found one idea in this position when you were trying to justify your move a couple moves ago, but you can't just go along with it blindly here. You have to actually look at the position and evaluate. And I've saved myself a lot of times by not blindly going along with my calculation from a couple moves ago and really taking the time every move to reevaluate and say, okay, I came up with an idea here in this position a couple moves ago. I foresaw this position. I was okay with what I had seen, but is there something even better? Is there an error with my calculation that it's not too late to fix? So it's just important to take your time, I think, and always reevaluate, even if you think you've calculated several moves ahead. Knight a5 at first glance does look like a very reasonable move, just forking the bishop and rook. You said you thought the rook would have to go back and defend and all that, but of course black has the option to go for this too and trade the bishop for the knight. But at first that doesn't look so horrible. It turns out that it is, though, because again this g5 idea rears its head. Black's just going to undermine your pawns, and your pawns are really weak. This e5 pawn is probably going to fall because it can just be surrounded. And now the black king is actually very safe in the center with the queens off the board. So instead of all this, instead of knight to a5, probably white should just bring his rooks to the central files, and I think black does have a small advantage here, but you would just keep playing. You said you couldn't see any advantages in your position, you just saw all the flaws. Yeah, admittedly, it's not the most pleasant position for white anymore, but it's by no means lost. You can fight back. Anyway, knight to a5, and black goes for this. Black exchanges the rook for the bishop. Or sorry, the knight for the bishop. Now he played f5, which looks like a mistake. Like I said, I think this g5 idea is a lot stronger. He played f5, you took on f5, knight d6, king to e6, and yeah, here you played rook to d1, and you said this was the biggest mistake of the game. Yeah, I agree with you. Right? I think rook h to g1 is just such a good move here. The alternative you gave, just taking control of this open file, stopping this g5 breakthrough that would really tear down your central pawns, and just gets your last piece into the game. That rook's the only piece that really still needs to get in the game. So yeah, this is definitely what I would make. So I'm curious why you played rook d1. What was the idea behind it? Did you just see it's an open file and rooks belong on open files, or did you really want to exchange off this rook? I'd kind of be curious there. Anyway, after rook to d1, black exchanges rooks, and now finally they found this idea g5, finally tearing down white's central pawns, and this makes life really unpleasant for white. Their center is going to fall apart, and it's not so clear what they're going to do. Yeah, and you said here you made a grave miscalculation and went for f takes g5 and playing rook h1. Well, yeah, rook h1 can't be right. Pacifying your rook in a rook in game, or even a rook and knight in game. The rook can never be passive like this. I would always rather defend the pawn with rook d2, although that's not pleasant either. The pawns start rolling. I think black is just now winning. Even here, after g5, it's just white's center is going to fall apart, and this huge pawn mass is going to start marching. I think white is objectively lost now, finally. This g5 idea has been strong for like half the game, and black finally found it. It's pretty amazing. So let's see how this finishes. You exchange, play rook to h1. Oh, and you said that you were hoping for black to blunder and take with the king, and then he gets forked, and you might have a chance. Or no, you have more than a chance there. You're up a rook. You would win. But instead, of course, he can take with a knight. And now white's in big trouble here. So you get a pawn over there. Okay, black gets a pawn back. Yeah, I think this is all just technique for black. He's just going to slowly roll these pawns. I'll just see if there's anything else notable. Check. The king's pretty safe, though. Yeah, now that pawn's a weakness. Yeah, now 3 connected passed pawns. Yeah, and 3 in a row there, and white finally resigns. So, all right, thank you very much for sharing this game with us, Orion. That was a very interesting game. I think even I learned some things there. That position was very sharp in the middle game. I think almost anyone would have difficulties calculating out all the details there, unless they were a master who had a lot of proficiency in these lines, who played, this bishop g5 line, all the time. Or if it was a longer time control game. I'm assuming this was played online and it wasn't that long of a time control. Maybe it was game in 30 or game in 60 or something, but it's definitely not, game in 2 hours, sudden death 1 hour or something like you might find in a tournament. So very sharp line there. I guess some takeaways from this game are, number 1, if you are going to play such a sharp line, I would put more effort into learning the theory and the ideas. And this goes beyond, by the way, just studying the opening moves. It has to do with all the ideas, too. Some of these ideas in the middle game. The sacrifice of the b2 pawn being a possibility earlier and not something to avoid at all cost. This thematic g5 pawn sacrifice to get the e5 square for the knight. So what I might recommend, if you really want to play this line as white, this very sharp bishop g5 line, is don't just go through databases and learn the opening moves. Also, find some games between, grandmasters and other professional players in this line and see what happens. It's a very good way to get a feel for the position, especially if they annotated the games. Annotated grandmaster games in your favorite opening line are amazing to go through and really absorb. And one other thing that really stuck out to me, and again, I'm so glad I have the players' comments here because they allow me to find things like this that I would have no idea about if I didn't have the annotations here. Saying that you played knight a5 because it was what you had calculated 3 moves ago, instead of taking a fresh look at it in this position. Definitely something to avoid and make sure that you're always taking your time every move, if you can, given the time control, to reevaluate and reassess your evaluations, even if you think they were clear in your head in the position 2 or 3 moves ago. So thank you very much for the game, and I will see you all again soon.